Welcome to Campus Consortium's EdTalk webinar series presenting Supporting Student Success in a Skill-Based World, Thoughts on the Optimal EdTech Ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Campus Consortium's EdTalk webinar series featuring Dr. Steve Jordan, full professor and director of the Advanced Learning Technologies Lab at University of Toronto. Today's topic for the EdTalk is Supporting Student Success in a Skills-Based World, Thoughts on the Optimal EdTech Ecosystem. Our presenters for today's session is Dr. Steve Jordan, full professor and director of the Advanced Learning Technologies Lab at University of Toronto, and our EdTalk facilitator today is John Wanamaker, executive director of Campus Consortium. We will take questions at the end of today's presentation. Please enter the question into the chat box or questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. Without further ado, please allow me to present Mr. Wanamaker and Mr. Jordan. Over to you, John.
Very good. Thank you, Rosie. Thanks, everyone, for joining. As Rosie mentioned, I am John Wanamaker. I'm the executive director at Campus Consortium, joining you live from Chicago this morning. Thanks, everyone, for your time and for joining us today for our EdTech webinar series. I'm sure this will be an engaging and informative session that will help you understand how an optimal EdTech ecosystem can support student success through formal development of transferable skills. I quickly want to give you an overview of the Campus Consortium and give you a sense of how the consortium was founded, how we're organized, and talk a little bit about some of the works that we are driven to support. The Campus Consortium was founded about 16 years ago and is a leading nonprofit organization with thousands of members across the globe. We're an education association with a mission to help members reduce the time, cost, and effort associated with implementing enterprise IT services. By leveraging shared IT services, lessons learned, and best practices so that each member can avoid reinventing the wheel when adopting new education technologies for their institution. We are supported by a number of sponsors, and we'd like to thank our sponsors today. You can see them listed on the screen here. These companies are working with us to support our grants as well as our broadcast today. We do a regular broadcast of EdTalks featuring some of the most up-to-date and relevant tech topics and trends in higher ed that are impacting campuses today. We are also supported by our sponsors with publications that we participate in. We do a series of white paper publications, case studies, and success stories featuring the outcomes and the impact that our grant program is having on institutions. All of this would not be possible without the support of our tech sponsors such as Unified, Quick Launch, Oracle, Black Belt Health, Salesforce, and SAP. I want to also review a little bit about our Open Campus Consortium technology grants. The consortium is a nonprofit organization working to help institutions implement latest technologies on their campus. The consortium runs a series of tech grants throughout the year, and here we've listed the 2019 tech grants that are currently open and are designed to provide a variety of solutions, products, and services to institutions at a reduced cost. We encourage you to check out campusconsortium.org, where you can learn more about the technology grants listed here. Now I would like to introduce you to the speaker of today's session, Dr. Steve Jordan. Apart from Dr. Jordan's various academic roles, he is also a consumer, producer, and researcher of educational technology. He's also been a key member of his university's Transformative Teaching and Learning Committee that is defining a strategy for innovation, which includes a deep consideration of the role technology may play and considered approaches to the procurement and the support of these technologies required to maximize the impact on their student success. These experiences have led Professor Jordan to a clearly defined notion of the optimal university-based ecosystem needed to transform university culture in a way that maximizes student success. In this webinar, he will present his perspective in a way meant to provoke thought and discussion on what he views as a critical moment for universities and colleges the world over. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Steve Jordan. Steve?
Hey, thank you very much, John. And let me just begin by saying thank you to everybody for taking the time. welcome to Canada. I'll say good morning because it is good morning here in Canada, and I really look forward to spending some time with you today. Now, so yeah, I just want to begin by giving you a sense of the roadmap that we're going to follow today, and I kind of want to hit these three things, but I mostly want to hit these four things. I mostly want to hit the final one. Talking about this notion of how we, and by the way, when I mean we, I'm going to talk about both universities and colleges, but also EdTech vendors and how we together form this sort of EdTech ecosystem and how we might be able to optimize the way we interact in a way that maximizes the impact we have on student success. So that's what I really want to get to is point 4, but quickly along the way, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am, so you have a sense of, well, whether you want to believe me or not, I guess. I'm going to talk a little bit about the current educational context in Canada, and I'm sensitive that this is a worldwide broadcast, so it may very well be the case that some of the things I'm highlighting in the Canadian context don't apply. Maybe Canada's a little ahead of where you are, maybe Canada's a little behind where you are. So I want to just kind of lay that out and make sure you all kind of know the world I'm coming from. I'm going to give you one example of an EdTech very quickly. It's an EdTech that I'm associated with and know quite well, and it's part of the reason why I've become really interested in figuring out the best ecosystem. But then once we have all of that in place, I'm going to jump into some ideas I have, again, meant to spur discussion and thought. So let's just jump right into this then. So who am I? I'm a lot of different people in some sort of way. It seems that I come at EdTech from multiple angles. So first of all, I teach an extremely large class. I'm sometimes scared to throw out the number because it kind of freaks some people out, but it's me and 1,700 students in my Introduction to Psychology class, so an extremely large class. But I still really care about making learning very deep and powerful, and so I use a lot of educational technology. So I'm a big time consumer. 7 different educational technologies outside my learning management system that I use for all sorts of different reasons. So I'm certainly on the consumer side. I also am director of the Advanced Learning Technologies Lab. Because I rely so much on technologies, I've become very interested in scientifically studying them and figuring out, what is the most efficacious, what works well, how can we optimize their ease of use and all that kind of stuff. So I do a lot of research in the lab on that. These last 2, though, may inform the talk a little bit more. As mentioned, I'm also at our university part of committees that are figuring out how we want to deal with EdTech on our campus. And as I'll highlight, I think this is part of something that's happening at least all through universities in Ontario, if not Canada. I think we are at this critical point where we realize that EdTech is going to play a big role in how we prepare ourselves to get into developing skills, figure out how to do this well. And the interesting thing is I'm sort of living that life on the university side, but also one of the technologies that's come out of our lab is a commercial product, and that's Peer Scholar. And so I'm also kind of coming at it from that side. I see it from the third-party vendor angle as well. So it's kind of like these 2 sides that I'm going to come at this with and try to talk about how those 2 sides can really partner in an effective way. So let's start with the current educational context. Obviously a big slide here. The important thing is you are here. I'll pull this away just for a second, just so you can see what's under the you are here. But we're really at a point now where, technology has been slowly seeping into universities, but it's now become a big part of who we are. We all have learning management systems in place. And I think we're all now thinking about, okay, if we think of the learning management system as a sort of garage, what pedagogical cars can we park in there? How can we use this learning management system to really up our pedagogical game? And we're especially thinking of technologies there, especially in the context of large classes and skills. And so at least in Ontario, there are a lot of universities who now are realizing that we don't really have a very good formal structured process for deciding which technologies we want to buy and how we're going to support them and how we're going to interact with vendors. And so, this is something that's on a lot of people's minds, myself included, and that's really going to be the focus. I think if we get this right, we have the ability to really have a powerful impact on student success. We can up our game in a big way. And so it's worth, spending some time and reflecting and really trying to get it right. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, we have professors using LMSs, and by the way, I always like to celebrate that in a world where it's very hard to convince any professor to do anything because the institution wants them to do it. Institutions have succeeded in getting us all to use learning management systems. And so that shows it's possible, right? We can get technology in the classroom, we can get it used widely. The real question is, what do we do next? Can we, what I imagine is some sort of suite of pedagogical tools that we integrate seamlessly with our learning management system, tools that are, modern and obviously have all the security and privacy features that they need to have to be in our ecosystem, and tools that can really kind of make a difference in terms of student learning. And so we really want to think about those tools. There's a lot of potential around them, and I'm going to say especially around skill development. So I want to highlight that issue for a second. We are at a point where the education system, the traditional education system, in my mind, is being challenged, sometimes in a way that's more extreme than I think people realize. We're constantly having employers saying, you guys need to do a better job teaching your students skills. They need to, what we want are people that come to our workplace with these different sets of skills. And you see some of them, I've highlighted on this slide here, the idea of cognitive skills. Sorry, I'm just minimizing something here so that it's not, there we go. Cognitive skills, which is the sort of critical thinking, creative thinking, reasoning, those sorts of things, problem solving, an employer will sometimes say. Intrapersonal skills, the ability to work with other people, so emotional intelligence and collaboration skills and such, which are, so the collaboration is more in the interpersonal skills, but they really want students to come armed with this. So this isn't just knowledge. They don't just want somebody that knows physics or chemistry, but they want somebody that really has these sorts of skills. Now, the trick is, universities are not good at formally developing skills, or at least we have not been. We're pretty good at formally transferring knowledge. But you can, I like to say things like, you can learn a lot about karate in an hour, but you can't learn to do karate in an hour. Skills are a very different beast. And so if we're going to work on trying to develop these skills, well, we've got some questions to answer. To kind of figure out the effective way to do that. So first of all, let me just throw this out here. Why is this important? Why skills? First of all, the job market is constantly changing. Traditional jobs are disappearing thanks to automation. New jobs are appearing. We know that most graduates, in fact, will work in multiple different work contexts before they settle into a career, if they settle into a static career at all. And so this means that students need these so-called transferable skills, the kinds of skills that can help them succeed in all sorts of contexts, especially including unknown contexts. So we don't know what the future world will be, but we know that if a student can think critically and think creatively, solve problems, communicate well with others, and if they have some sense of their own strengths and weaknesses, that those sort of attributes will allow them to succeed in almost any context. So it's one way of future-proofing, future-preparing our students. So it makes sense that this is an important thing, but it's a challenge. How do we do it? As I mentioned, so if I go more towards basketball rather than karate, you can learn a lot about something quite efficiently. We have a whole memory system for information, and all you need to get into that memory system is a really salient exposure to the information. So one great lecture, one great textbook, one great resource can teach us something, can give us a bit of information we haven't had before. Now, obviously, if we have repeated exposure to that information, then that learning becomes deeper and stronger. But generally speaking, we can pick up information really quickly, really easily. And I would argue that universities have, for many years, been in the game of transmitting information. We've been curating the important things we think our students need to know, and then we've been trying to present that information to them in structured and organized ways that help them learn it. But if we want to teach them to think critically or creatively, that's a skill. And skills develop differently. So skills involve an automation of certain behavioral and cognitive processes. It's like things that don't originally work together. If you make them work together a few times, they start to connect and automate their connections, and they become very fluid. So skills almost always start poor, but with repeated structured practice, the skill gets better. So it generally gets better. Structured practice is optimal. A lot of feedback as we practice really makes it good. So, you know, think of something like a formal training camp for a sport. These are the sorts of structured practice experiences they give. I do not want to imply that we don't already give our students practice thinking critically, thinking creatively. We do, but I will argue we do it in a relatively informal way. Hope our great lecture will spontaneously push some people to think critically. So we hope we're going to provoke this. We hope a great essay topic will make people think creatively, think critically, learn to communicate. But could we up our game? Could we do this better? And I think we can, but I think technology is going to be a critical role for doing that. If we want to teach skills, we have to give this repeated structured practice. And, you know, the problem is, how do we, that's intensive. You know, if you think of a skills training camp, you think of somebody learning karate or guitar or basketball or whatever, there's a lot of intense work that has to go on. How are we going to fit that into our higher ed system? Well, we know that most of the practice is likely to occur outside the classroom. You know, we're not going to give up on lecturing and stuff like that. Maybe we'll flip a classroom or something and do a little bit of this work in the classroom. But most of it's going to happen outside the classroom. It's probably going to need to be supported and managed by EdTech, especially if we want to do it at scale. And so if this is important to us, if we want to really think about developing skills, we need to know, is there a technology to do this? And generally, I think we need to get better at figuring out what technologies can help us reach our missions in sensical ways. And how do we find these? How do we procure them? How do we support them? I think, you know, it's a critical time. And if we get that right, we can go a long way. So I'm a concrete thinker. I'm also a psychologist, and I know a lot of people have trouble thinking abstractly. And so sometimes a concrete example can help a lot. So I want to just kind of give you a concrete example to show you that a technology does exist to in structured training. So something called Peer Scholar. It's something we developed in our lab. I'm going to have to go very quickly through it here. If you would like to know more, you know where I am. Please reach out. I'd be happy to talk to you more. But Peer Scholar really harnesses the power of peer assessment to give students this repeated structured practice. And let me just give you a sense. Here's how it would work. Step one, students would be asked to create some composition. This can work in any course at any level. So you can think of your course. What do you teach? What is the sort of thing you might ask students to do in an essay or some bit of work? So imagine, you ask students to compose something. Because it's technology, of course, it can be anything digital. So yes, it could be a written work, but it could also be a video, picture, whatever. But imagine a bunch of students in your class compose something and submit it. Then they go to this next step, and this is where the practice begins. So in this next step, they log into a system and they see the compositions submitted by a subset of their peers. Let's say 5, just to have a number. So they're going to see 5 of their peers' work, anonymously presented, so they don't see the name, randomly selected from the class. And now what we're going to ask students to do is to assess and provide feedback to that work. Just to make this clear, imagine, you can ask them all sorts of questions. You can guide their analysis in all sorts of ways, but imagine this one question for now. Imagine you said, for each peer, I want you to look at the work, think of all the ways it could be better, zoom in on the one thing that if this person improved, you think that would make the maximum impact on the overall quality of the work. Tell the person what that one thing is, and give them some idea about how to improve it, okay? Now, if we ask students to do that, they look at peer one's work, well, now what do they have to do? What's the biggest weakness? They have to think critically to figure out, of all of the ways this could be better, what's the thing that's, right now the biggest weakness? Then they have to think creatively. How do we fix this weakness? What could this person do to make it better? Then they have to express, they have to communicate these thoughts to that peer. All right, critical thinking, creative thinking, expressive communication, then what? Well, then they go to peer 2 and they do it again. And then they go to peer 3 and they do it again. 4, 5. So they're getting repeated, structured practice using these skills in an organized way, culminating in the communication of their ideas. And by the way, while they're doing this, they're seeing what 5 peers did on a project they also did. So they're also getting a really good sense of where their work fits. And that's what we call metacognitive awareness. Okay, so they've already gotten some practice, but then there's another step. While they are assessing their peers are assessing them. So the third step is all about the formative use of feedback. So in the third step, students are going to see now these 5 pieces of feedback that peers have applied to their work. And once again, we're going to ask them to analyze that feedback. And once again, let me just give you one question we could ask them. We could say, this peer is going to suggest to you a way your work could be improved. Read what they suggest carefully, and then answer this question. How much better do you think your work would be if you did what this peer suggested? Okay. Well, to answer that question, you have to start by thinking critically about what the peer suggests. You really have to understand what their suggestion is. You then have to think creatively about, okay, if I took my work and I changed it the way this person suggested, how much better would it be? So we're now in a context of what we call receptive communication. Sitting down and listening to someone else communicate with us. We're thinking critically about it. We're thinking creatively about employing that. And we have to do all that to answer the question. So we do that for the feedback that we got from peer 1. And then we do it again for peer 2. And then we do it again for peer 3. So more of this repeated structured practice with these skills. And then finally, we're allowed the opportunity to revise our work in light of all this analysis we've done. Go ahead and make our work better. Okay, so the critical, I hope that gives you a concrete idea. So now students are getting a lot of experience, a lot of structured practice using these skills we want them to develop. And the really cool thing about this process is that it does not require a lot of time and effort on the part of instructors. They simply, set they set up what they want students to do, so they define the composition, and then they grade at the end. I do recommend that instructors grade the feedback as well as the final product, so there may be a little additional work for instructors, but not much. Most of the work is driven by the students themselves. It is active learning, it is assessment as learning, and it's very powerful, and students like it, appreciate it, value it, and want more of it. Okay, so again, all of this to say that I'm not talking pie in the sky that, there may be technologies that can help us develop skills. There are technologies that can help us develop skills. I am behind this particular one, and part of my role is connecting with universities and saying, hey, does this not solve a huge problem for you? Does this not, give you a good sense of how to effectively develop? There's a measure component that I'm not going to talk about given time, but how to develop any skill. And also we've done a bunch of research to show that it really works and that it's highly usable. So it can scale to any discipline, any use. There's no reason why we couldn't be, having this in our institution. It also fits because it does not, we talk about disruptive technologies. We may want to disrupt the learning. We may want to, positively impact the learning we're providing, but we don't really, universities are not good at disrupting the whole way we all do things. This doesn't disrupt the way we do things. It can kind of be integrated quite easily, seamlessly, and have a major impact. So one would think that, as an EdTech vendor, this is what you want. This should be great. Oh, wow, this will be easy. I'm going to tell these people we have a solution for them, and I do that. And there's challenges, there's frustrations. And so this is really going to set up a lot of what we're going to talk about now. So here are some of the challenges that I face when I'm playing that role. First of all, at any given university, it can be extremely challenging to find somebody to even take the time to listen, learn, and see a demo. One would think our universities would have at least one person whose job it is to have their antenna up on innovations in education and who would be hungry to hear about stuff that's out there. There are people like that, but they're really, really busy. They have 50 million things on their plate. They have a university with their current, whatever's hot in the university now, experiential learning, etc. And so now somebody comes knocking on their door and says, I want to tell you about some other latest, greatest thing. That can be difficult. It shouldn't be difficult. That's one of the issues I'll talk about. When you do talk to these people, of course you have to convince them about the pedagogy of the technology. But my experience is that part's easy, at least with PeerScholar. They see it, they get it, 100%. This is a great tool. I would love to see it used widely on the campus. But then they have a worry. How do I get faculty to use this? Will faculty use it? We don't want to buy into something if it's not going to be picked up by faculty. And so this is a major challenge by a lot of these centers of teaching and learning, internal scaling, getting a technology used widely within a campus. We often, by the way, run into real governance issues. People will just simply say, yes, I'm the director of CTL or I'm whatever, but I have no budget to buy educational technology. There is no central budget. All of these departments do their own thing and etc. And so, yeah, I think what you're doing is great, but I have no idea how we would ever even bring your technology to the campus. So, that's a little frustrating. And again, it will be a focus of a lot we talk about. It is also, by the way, universities are very traditional. I sometimes say they're right behind religious institutions in terms of really having a deep tradition of how we do things. And so we're really risk averse when it comes to innovation and change, even when we accept things like, yes, we have to get better at developing skills. It's still a hard road to kind of push change. So how can we kind of optimize things so that we can get the right EdTech used widely and having an impact on a campus in the most optimal way? So that's really what we want to go to. Now, I'm not going to suggest to you I have the answer. I have some thoughts. And so I'm really interested in your thoughts and ideas as well. So let me throw my thoughts out there and let's see where they go. Before we do that, we're going to do a little poll. I don't know, Rosie, if I advance to the next slide or if the...
Yes, that's the next slide.
Now, I just want to ask you a simple question just to kind of, there we go. So here's a simple question just to kind of get us all, I've been talking at you for a while. So a little scenario, you meet somebody at a networking event who works in EdTech. So you know how you just run into, hey, what do you do? Oh, I'm with this EdTech company. How are you most likely to react? Either A, ask them more about the technology and what problem it addresses. B, continue to chat, but stay clear of the topic of EdTech. I don't want to hear about what you're doing. Don't try to sell me anything. Or 3, act like you see a friend you need to talk to and walk away quickly. So if you don't mind, can you choose the one of those that you think would most accurately reflect your reaction in that sort of situation? And I assume, Rosie, once the responses are in, you'll be able to show us the results.
Yes, it's 67% now. Once it's 100, I'm going to post the results.
Sure. It may not be 100. Somebody may be sipping a coffee or something. Hey, actually, it may be waiting for me to pick one too. I would go and chat with them. No, no, I can't
Yes,
pick.
please.
By the way, I'll mention as we wait that I do have the chat window open. I'll kind of watch if people have questions, if it's points of clarification as we go, because I'm going to start hitting some of these points for us to think about. I will keep an eye on it. If it looks like a bigger question that should wait till the end, I will make it wait to the end. Whoa, I've just become a big head again. All righty. Okay, I'm going to advance the slide, Rosie. I'm not seeing results. Maybe I have to advance the slide to see them. No. Okay, well, that's all right. Hopefully the slides, the results pop up at some point, but my suspicion is that, here we go. Really? Well, okay, that's fantastic. That is not my experience. My experience, so you guys all, this is fantastic. This is what I would love our attitude to be. And I'm highly sensitive to the fact that you guys are a self-selected group who's interested in EdTech to begin with. It's often the case that I find that people do not want to know a lot of details, whereas this always seems a little strange to me because I think we should. But you guys obviously do, so I'm not going to belabor this too much. But other than to say, this is at least has been a phenomenon in the Canadian educational system that's been changing a little bit. In a time of open educational resources, which are great and have their place, there's been a suspicion about commercial sorts of enterprises. And so, I always like to say, hey, these EdTech vendors, they don't carry any special dangers, germs, nor should they be judged by their desire to be paid for offering a service. We really have to realize we all get paid to teach. And if we need somebody to code something properly, they should get paid, etc. They are trying to help us up our game. And so the commercial aspect of it shouldn't worry us, although we should think about how we could work together in a way that really optimizes this interaction between vendors and universities. So one of the ideas that I want to throw out there is I would love to see every institution have a forward-facing site for vendors that kind of says, hey, if you think you have a technology that will help us meet our goals better, here's a form you can fill out. Tell us about your technology. Tell us about the pedagogy. I'll hit a little bit more of some of the things I think you should ask a vendor about. Do you have a train-the-trainer course? And give me a short video of a demo of your product or something and upload it to the site. So, it doesn't have to be human-to-human contact as a first step. But I certainly think vendors should have an easy way of letting you know what their products are and how they might help you. And then obviously we would want a human on the other side of that can vet and look at some of these and decide on which ones they would like to, consider further. So I think that's step one, is to have a door that vendors can walk through and feel welcome to tell us how they think they could help us. Yeah, and I'm also thinking, by the way, that there's other things we could do to try to connect this, I guess what we call visibility. I'm a music player, and there's a show called NAMM every year where all the music vendors show all their products. And so you can go to that one stop and see a whole host of things. Well, Campus Consortium, to some extent, is trying to kind of get word out about technologies. I'm also part of something called 1HE. If you don't know 1HE yet, it's kind of like a LinkedIn, but really for higher education, a safe space for higher education, and they have real positive social values associated with them. But they are also considering having a part of their site where vendors can basically pitch their products. And you as a user could then go and look at the range of products that are available, decide what you're interested in or not. So step one, my first suggestion is we really need to enhance this communication so that it's much easier for universities to know what's out there, why should I be interested, and much easier for vendors to reach universities at an institutional level. Okay, so that's step one. Now, what about procurement? How do things currently work? Well, often what we get told when I talk to somebody at Center of Teaching and Learning, they go, okay, that's all really interesting, but before we even think about this technology at a very deep level, you should have about 2 or 3 or 4 professors on our campus use it and love it. And when those professors, say this is fantastic, I will use it in my class, it's valuable to me, then we will start to consider it. But until that time, we will not consider it. Now, I think there's some worries with this, and I'm going to highlight a few of these. This sort of bottom-up procurement strategy. One of them, I think, we can see a symptom of it. At U of T, we now use an LMS called Canvas. Obviously, it's one technology we purchased institutionally. We only really have one other technology that we've kind of purchased in that same institutional level, and what is it? Turnitin. Why Turnitin? Turnitin can catch students plagiarizing. If we listed our institutional priorities, the things that we hope that our students, get from their university experience, where on that list would we say knowledge of how to cite things properly? It would be on the list. Would it be number one? Because if you look at the EdTech adoption right now, that seems to be the implication, is the thing we value most is teaching proper citation principles. Or, I mean, you can get deeper with that. You can say, the ethics of proper academic conduct. Okay, but where'd critical thinking go? Where'd creative thinking go? Where'd communication go? Is this really the top one? And why did we come to this state? Well, because professors like being able to catch students cheating. It's the professor driving the procurement process. And what is valuable to a professor may not be perfectly aligned with what's valuable to an institution. So I will argue that there are so many questions we should be asking. Is the technology secure? Privacy is a big issue. Is the price reasonable? Will professors use it? Is it accessible? Is it sufficiently supported? Does the pedagogy align with our mission? I'm going to highlight that one. Is it inclusive? These are all these questions that are important to us at an institutional level. And these are the sorts of things that we should bring to bear when we're thinking about technologies. Do we really just want this to be professor driven by the loudest voice in the room? Or do we want to take a more principled approach to deciding procurement? I think it should be principled. I think it should be top down. So I also think it should be driven by our mission, as I kind of suggested. So at the University of Toronto, we say the university will strive to ensure that its graduates are educated in the broadest sense of the term, with the ability to think clearly, judge objectively, and contribute constructively to society. I don't see that list. For example, general statements, but think clearly, judge objectively, and contribute constructively to society. This is skills, this is using knowledge, this is problem solving, this is communication. Those are the things that the University of Toronto says are important to them. That's how we should judge technology. What is important to us? And then when we're having vendors, say, fill out a form on our website, we should say, okay, how is this going to help us better achieve our mission? Here's our mission, and we should get really clear about the mission. Here are the things that we value, the things that we hope students will pick up at our institution. So I think we should elucidate those a little more clearly, and then we should tell vendors to directly connect with us with those things. Tell us how you will help us. If I were a hockey player and I were looking at, say I'm a goalie and I want new goalie pads, I want to know, why are these pads better than the previous ones in terms of what matters to me, keeping the puck out of the net. Same question, how is this going to help us do better than we're doing in terms of what's important to us? We would also love some evidence base behind that, but even prima facie, sometimes somebody can say, well, here's how the technology enhances engagement by doing whatever, and you can say, yeah, okay, I see that, I buy that. In some cases you can just accept it. But if there's research evidence to support it, so much the better. That should put a technology higher on the list. We should be encouraging vendors. We should be explicit with vendors that we love to see this evidence base. And if you don't have one, if you don't have any evidence that your technology actually does what you say it does, you should go get one and come back. This should be a sort of step that people have to make so that we know we're not investing in technologies that don't work, because that's very destructive to the whole ecosystem if we bring in ineffective technologies. So we want to vet them well, and we can put some of that on the vendors. Absolutely. Okay, I just wanted to reconnect with this campus consortium thing, because there's another more subtle point I want to make here. So, campus consortium, if we kind of take it from that second sentence there, the campus consortium mission is to help members reduce the time, cost, and effort associated with implementing enterprise IT services by leveraging shared services, lessons learned, best practices, etc. We want to think about costs to students, costs to campuses, and also something that I'll think of as a sort of innovation trade-off. So I've listed 3 EdTech companies here, and I've kind of listed them from very big, Pearson, to sort of middle, something called Top Hat. I don't know how widely known that is in the European context, but it's probably our most successful EdTech startup in Canada. So they're doing well in startup sort of terms. And then there's Cognito, that's my company, and we're small. We're very small, literally under 10 people that are part of our group. And so as you kind of think of these companies, how does Pearson sell things? They knock on a lot of doors. They go one-to-one to profs. Same with Top Hat, by the way. They use more phones and such, but they tend to call professors directly and really kind of go with that bottom-up approach that I've told you is so powerful now. That's hard to do for a small company. It requires you to have a large sales staff. Universities don't tend to like these sales interactions very much to begin with, but they're very costly to the company. And if you're going to have that large sales staff, then you're going to have to charge more for your product. That's all there's to it. But if we could do things that allow companies that don't have the large sales staff to still play the game, then there could be real gains here. There could be gains in costs. If you don't need that sales staff, you can offer effective technologies at a lower cost. And there's also another little hint here that the smaller companies tend to be more innovative. They're more able to kind of flexibly do things, whereas a Pearson is very structured and very traditional. And so if we're looking for innovative ideas, where should we be looking? And I would argue it's the smaller, newer companies. And therefore, we want them in the game. So as we think about governance, I argue we should think about this too. And that, for example, that brings us to a point like this. We really, really, really need to centralize. I cannot tell you how many institutions I have approached and they say, we are highly siloed. We have, every department makes its own decisions about X, Y, and Z and how to support it, and they all have their own budgets and yada, yada, yada. That kind of approach, first of all, can result in a duplication of relationships with vendors. And in fact, we're encouraged to do that. Why don't you approach the engineering department and then approach, the business school and then approach whatever. And so suddenly on one campus, we have to have, many different relationships and we have multiple versions of the same technology on the same campus. So that seems kind of strange to do it that way. There often is no rational approach to procurement, no central approach. It is the loudest voice in the room, so you get the right person excited. Cool, that's great, but it doesn't seem like the right way to do things. And critically support. There's no central support in terms of things like institutional web pages that might show might show faculty how to use a technology, maybe examples of effective use cases in different situations. And maybe even human support, right? That we would like to have a central thing where education technology is supported really well. But to do that, you need to have a smaller number of technologies. You need to have vetted them well, etc. Again, this last point that I want to make is just the one I already made. If you have this sort of decentralized approach, you are pushing companies to develop large sales forces. That's the only way to succeed in that context. And that's going to drive prices up in a way that isn't really necessary. Not if we instead centralize things. So we decide, just like our LMS, we have an LMS, and now we decide what technologies we're going to add. So we have this notion of building a suite of technologies that align with our goals. So it's much easier to support because you're going to have a smaller set of technologies. By the way, we kind of have to go this way anyway with privacy and security. You don't want every prof or every department using whatever they want to use. You have to vet these products for privacy and security. So better to have a small number of products that you centrally support. And you can also then focus on things like increasing and supporting use. You can have, seminars on these specific technologies, examples on these specific technologies, and you start to get a community around each of these technologies and with expertise, with knowledge, with continuity, and that really makes it a lot easier in terms of really getting it used well. And if it's a good technology, that's going to increase its impact, right? And it also allows the lighter companies to play the game. Okay, it allows companies like mine to be in there and to be doing stuff because we only have to deal with 1 or 2 people at a campus, set them up, and help them with their support. Much easier than having to deal with 20 entities on a campus, for example. Okay. I also want to really kind of suggest that we can do a better job partnering with each other, universities and EdTech vendors. So again, what we kind of do is enough professors have liked this, and so now we're going to license for full institutional use. I argue that quite often our sales model or our procurement, it kind of goes from flirting to marriage, really quickly. Once you pass this low test, then we're going to look at a full institutional model. The problem with that is that once an ed tech company gets the full institutional model, they're kind of done. They just, really all they want is to not lose it. But they don't necessarily have a stake in how effectively it's used on your campus and how widely it's used on your campus. And I think they should. So I suggest that here's how things should work. And you can, and we as the universities can insist on this sort of approach. We originally want a low cost, an unlimited use pilot. So we want to give you we want you to give us unlimited use at a low, reasonable cost. And this is our opportunity to test, to pilot. But it's not just piloting the technology, it's also piloting the relationship. And so the idea was, we're going to need a lot of help from you. If you want this pilot to be successful, we want everybody to have a great experience with it. And so you're going to have to give us a bunch of information we can pass along to faculty to support their use. And you may also have to help us a little bit in terms of marketing your product on our campus. How can we get word out? Do you have any resources we can use to kind of promote it on our campus? Do you have speakers that maybe we could come and have give a talk on our campus? And so suddenly the vendors, but they're part of the process of making that tool successful on your campus. Once you go buy that initial pilot, if you like the tool, then I argue you still don't go straight to an institutional license, but instead you have a growth period where costs should be based on usage, and it should gradually increase from this initial low cost to whatever the full institutional price will be through this middle step where the cost is based on usage. And again, the idea here is to tell the vendor, hey, you have a stake in helping us increase usage on campus. How can we work together to make this happen? Nobody should know the product better than the vendor. And so get them to the table. Don't just buy the product and then have them go away. Keep them in the game. So I think that's an idea throwing out there. So it is, really the idea of partnering here, that the vendor should be able to give you resources for your web content, webinars, use cases, examples of cool things profs are doing, promotional materials, all these kinds of things that a university can then use to try to encourage use on their campus and to support use on their campus well. With respect to support, this is an interesting question because I've recently found out that an assumption I had is naive. But at U of T, at University of Toronto, we have a lot of people who are part of the university whose job it is to support faculty when they use EdTech. I've since learned not every campus has this. And so one of the things I would recommend is, as you centralize EdTech, you should get a team of people whose job it is to promote educational technologies that reach certain goals and who support them. From the vendor side, the vendor should train these people really well. In addition to their product, you should insist on a powerful train the trainer experience that your support people can take to really understand the technology, and not just the technical part of the technology, not just how to set things up, but also the pedagogy. What kind of learning does it support? What are some examples of how it supports it? These people become the bridge between the vendor and your campus. They are working with faculty straight on. They're getting feedback from faculty, and they can bring that back to the vendor. So I think, a vendor should really adopt these people as part of your campus, train them well, and stay connected to them. All part of a sort of partnership thing. The vendor should also be able to provide you everything you need to monitor progress, see usage, and if they can help you reflectively use their tools through learning analytics or something like that, they should be doing that too. Okay, so again, bigger idea is that the vendor is now a partner. And I think that's kind of critical. All right, so just winding this up, here are the points that I threw out there, sort of listed in a different way. I really think that universities have to respect the role that vendors can play in helping us up our game. They're giving us new tools that can allow us to do things we haven't done before. I think we need to centralize our approach to adoption, focusing more on our mission to our students. We really want to keep the small vendors in the game. It reduces costs, it supports innovation, and those things are critical. And we really want this sort of partnering relationship where the vendor is expected to help you reach your goals, and that together you kind of commit to do your respective parts to really, get that EdTech to take root or not on your campus, but at least try and maximize its effectiveness. Okay, so. Pretty much done. Sorry if that was a quick sort of tour de force at the end, but I wanted to highlight those things. So I'm a reflective guy. So we have this simple poll here. I'm just curious how closely I'm hitting the mark with where you are. I mean, maybe these are things that are already going on. So I'm kind of just trying to get a pulse of the room. So curious, to what extent did this webinar inspire you to make changes to your part of the EdTech ecosystem? Did you see things here that you think, oh, okay, yeah, we could do that, or not? So, a couple selections here, nothing really new. This could be the case for some of you. Maybe this is sort of how you do things already, or a couple of the ideas were novel and got me thinking a lot to think about here. Not sure I agree with all points. I mean, I assume that's true. Or bang on, we must reorganize and you have shown us the way. I mean, that's, yeah, okay. One has to have fantasy, right? So if you can pick one of those options, there we are. Okay, so yeah, that's good that most of you say there was at least something new there and something that got you thinking. That was the real goal. I know we're kind of short on time. Always tricky here. Here's my information. Let me just say, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or 1HE. There's my email address. Feel free to send me emails about anything. If you'd like to know more about PeerScholar, I would love to tell you more. Just send an email to info@PeerScholar and we can set that up. We've got a few minutes for questions, although I assume if you're willing to hang out, I'm certainly willing to hang out. So I will stop talking and you can ask questions in the chat box that I will answer. Yeah, and let's go from there. Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
Steve, thank you very much for that great overview. I think this is super insightful and helpful for all of us today who've been a part of this EdTech webinar. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. First question here is, you've talked and you focused on commercial technologies. Where do you see open educational resources fitting into your story?
Yeah, and I think that would be a fantastic discussion to have, because there are certainly, when it comes to things like resources for teaching, animations people make and various other things like that, I think it's very cool when people will create them in such a way so that they can be shared and used. And so I'm a big fan of OERs in general. However, especially as privacy and security issues become as stringent as they are, once we start thinking about technologies we're going to integrate with our learning management system, which of course is integrated with our student systems and all sorts of things, you need, as a technology vendor, you need certain expertise, and you need constant vigilance to make sure you are keeping up with all these things. So I think is in the kind of world I've talked about today of plugging things into the learning management system, in my opinion, this is more a role for commercial. We need the security and et cetera that comes with a commercial entity that will continue to evolve the product, continue to support the product, which is really critical. So I think those two things each have different niches. And the question someone can ask is, could I easily just share this thing with others and play no subsequent role myself? If the answer is yes, then it's probably a good OER. But if the answer is no, that this person is going to need things from me, then you're getting into commercial territory, I believe.
Thank you for that. If another question we have, if we follow your recommendation, where do you see this leading? Will each university essentially be building an EdTech toolbox of complementary tools?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I really imagine. If we can start to imagine the different goals we have, in terms of, they could be things like critical thinking, etc., but it could even be things of better information transmission. So there are a lot of tools that try to enhance engagement. Think of online textbooks that try to be more interactive now, or response systems in the classroom. That's helping us reach a goal as well. So I think we need to think about these goals, find technologies that help us reach it, but I suspect it will be a small set. I suspect universities will have maybe 6 to 12 institutionally supported technologies that have all been vetted very well, that have all passed all the scrutiny that they need to pass, and that are supported really well on campus. They become part of that campus culture. Where people can just go to the professor next door if they have a question about using something, because that professor has probably used it as well. I also think, by the way, all of these tools will eventually feed information back to a more meta-level tool that will allow us to do more machine learning and learning analytics to actually see the impact these tools are having, see the impact various other processes are having on what we can measure with these tools. So I think, yeah, once we get that toolbox, that empowers us to do other things that allow us to up our game even further. So that's certainly where I imagine this going, yeah.
Okay, so if adopting LMSs was the first wave of EdTech penetration and building an EdTech toolbox is the next step, what comes next?
Yeah, and it really is. I was kind of touching on that a little bit with the next one. I really think it is that meta-level tool where we could imagine, it could work different ways at different levels. As a professor, you could probably just put in a student's name and kind of see their performance across all these different tools. So if a student wanted to come see you at office hours, you could have a really good sense of their performance in your course before you even chat with them, but also more at the administrative level. And so let me give you one quick example just to give you a taste of what I think is possible. One of the things you can do in Peer Scholar that I didn't highlight is you can measure student skills at various points. So let's imagine you measure a bunch of different students' ability, and of course they will vary. But if we know other things that happened on their pathway, we might be able to do a sort of regression analysis where we could find that all those students who are doing really well on critical thinking, they all happen to take this weird second-year course. And so something that happened in that second-year course is obviously impacting their critical thinking downstream. We should go look at that course and we could see what that professor is doing, because there's something really powerful there. So that's the sort of reflective use as we get this suite of tools and as we pull information from them and have other tools that digest that information, we can begin to really reflectively assess how well, for example, we are teaching skills, what processes have the biggest impact on them, and then we can ultimately restructure our programs in ways that optimize our ability to teach these skills on campus. And I think that's still down the road a little ways, but having the right structure and having the right ecosystem that will allow that down the road, I think is a very important point at this point.
Steve, one last question, and it pertains to Peer Scholar and some of what you just mentioned.
Yep.
How does your Peer Scholar tool connect with the desire for widespread experiential learning on campuses?
Yeah, okay, so that's cool. So I like to toss this out every now and then. It's very much our approach at U of T. When you put a student in an experiential learning situation, so just to back up a little bit there and make sure we're all thinking the same way, experiential learning used to be thought of primarily as like a co-op program, where a student leaves our university and literally works with an external agency. Now, thanks to tools like Ripen, if any of you don't know Ripen, you might want to check it out, RIIPEN. It's something we use at University of Toronto. It allows experiential learning in courses, a lighter form of experiential learning. So students can be interacting with a third party, and they can do assignments within a course, but assignments that involve interactions with third external parties. So it's a form of experiential learning, but it can happen in the classroom. So this is very hot in Ontario, certainly. Everybody is trying to bring up their experiential learning, but here's the thing. Experiential learning usually involves students problem solving with these external agencies. And it's great because it's it's a real problem they're trying to solve. That's fantastic if they're good problem solvers. But do we want them working with external agencies trying to help them solve their problems if they're not very good problem solvers? That's probably not going to work well. So the idea we have at University of Toronto is we use Peer Scholar very heavily, especially in our early courses, first, second year courses, throughout as well. But our hope is that Peer Scholar will start to develop these skills and get students to a point where they have reasonable critical thinking, creative thinking, communication skills, and now they are ready to bring these skills to a more authentic context. And if we kind of prepare them in that way, we're increasing the likelihood that that experiential episode works out well, that it's positive for everybody. And that's really important. Obviously, we want the student to have a great experience. We want that third party to have a great experience, to find it valuable to work with our students. Also, experiential learning builds these bridges between our universities and these third parties, and that can lead to all other good collateral stuff. And so if we do it well, we optimize all those benefits. But if we just throw students into situations they're not really prepared for, we can do the reverse. And so we kind of see Peer Scholar as a sort of Peer Scholar and Ripen to some extent as a 1-2 punch, as a way of developing the skills and then letting students see their value by having them use them in real world context. And so in that way, I think they work together really, really well.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Steve. The presentation was fantastic. Thanks for taking these questions for us today. I do want to just quickly remind our audience today about the Open Campus Consortium grants we are running this summer. We have several of them that are currently open, and they're designed to provide a variety of solutions and products and services for institutions at a reduced cost. So if you're interested, take a look at the grants we are running. Visit campusconsortium.org for more information. I also want to announce that we'll have an upcoming EdTalk next month on campus safety. We'll be sharing an invitation with you all that will have details for joining. Thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar today. We will be sharing the recording and the slides of today's EdTalk with you in a follow-up message, and look forward to having you join us on our future EdTalks. Today, we'll be signing off, and I'll once again thank Dr. Steve Jordan from University of Toronto for an excellent presentation. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. This is John Wanamaker signing off from
guys.
Campus Consortium.